1, 4, 6, 4, 5.
Okay, seems to be working now.
I got
4, 7.
7.
4, 7. We're on chapter 7. We're on chapter 4, Mishnah 7. All right, and we are moving into family laws, meaning between husband and wife. So this first one's not bad. It gets a little more complicated. I'm hoping we'll be able to get through it without too much confusion. All right, so Mishnah 7. We don't have our usual volunteer. So again, the plan is to just go around the table. If you want to pass and don't want to read out loud, then just say pass. Do you mind starting?
Yes, we're going to start with 1 at the top commentary, right?
Correct.
All right. A woman is betrothed by a dinar or the value of a dinar, according to the opinion of Beit Shammai, but Beit Hillel says by a peruta, or the value of a peruta. And how much is a peruta? 1/8 of an Italian isar.
Okay, so nowadays, most of the time when a man wants to betroth a woman, he will give her a gift, and the gift usually looks like this: a ring. This has become the standard for betrothal gifts, and it's been the standard all the way back into this time as well. But the question is, how much does this have to be worth, right? If I have actually leave the door open a little bit, it helps the air out. If I have a ring that's made out of tissue paper, right? If I have a ring that's made out of aluminum foil, left over from my cooking, is that good enough to get married? And here we have a disagreement, right? Here we have that Shammai says that it needs to be a dinar, and Hillel says Beit Hillel says it needs to be a pruta. A pruta is less than a dinar. As always, the halacha goes by Beit Hillel, or almost always. The basic value in modern equivalency is about a penny. Is a way to remember that. That yes, you can get betrothed with something, but it has to have some value, minimal, but it has to have some value. And that's what they're arguing about here. Make sense? By the way, don't try and give a betrothal ring that's only worth a penny. You'll probably find that your beloved is not going to be pleased with your decision. But if it's an emergency, and if that's the only way to begin the marriage process, there's no way to buy anything else, you shouldn't put off a wedding just because you can't buy a fancy enough ring.
So can you use something of a Coke can?
Most people would say that that's not worth a penny. No.
Cracker Jacks.
Right. So there are a lot of things like most plastic rings that you get, as prizes or things like that. Those are usually, you can buy them for less than a penny each through the bulk wholesale type sellers. It's, so most people would say those kinds of joke rings are not worth enough. But a penny is still fairly small when talking about rings. Okay. On to part 2.
What the Italian isar has got to do here?
Oh, so the issue here is they're trying to connect the currency values they have to another currency to try and help you understand how much this is. In the modern equivalent, it'd be like saying, it has to be worth $1. $1 is like the equivalent of 1.27 pounds. I think that's about what the British pound is right now, right? Or if they give you the yen equivalent or something like that. It's just a way to help you understand what the currency was worth in their day. All right. On the other end of the relationship, so we started with the betrothal. Now we're moving to divorce.
Beit Shammai says one may dismiss his wife with an old bill of divorcement, but Beit Hillel forbids it.
Go ahead and read the what is it, because that's what's going to be important.
What is an old bill of divorcement? Whenever he was secluded with her after he has written it for her.
Okay. Timeline, because that's going to be important. So this is the timeline of the end of a marriage. And at the very, very end, he will deliver the get. That is to say, at the very, very end, the last thing that happens between the husband and wife until they are not husband and wife is she is given the get, right? That's the very end of the process. However, at some point, you have to write the get, or usually would commission the get to be written rather than the husband writing it himself, because the details of the get are rather specific. So you write a get and you have to deliver a get. He's written the get, and then they are alone together. Can he still use this get afterwards? Now, what's the question here? What happens when you're alone together?
There's an inference.
Sex, okay? The question is, did they have sex or not? If they had sex, then everybody agrees that the original get that he wrote is now an old get. And an old get you can't use. The question is, with sex, right? You definitely can't use the get. With seclusion, where we don't know if they did or didn't, they were alone and they could have, do we assume they did and then say, get rid of that get and you have to write a new one? Or do we say, go ahead and use that get, I'm sure nothing happened? That's what they're arguing about. And Beit Shammai says, I'm sure nothing happened, right? If we have witnesses to hanky-panky, then that's a different story. But if we don't think anything happened, they were just alone together, well, whatever, go ahead and use the same get. And Beit Hillel says, nope. If they were alone at all, then we assume that something might have happened, and that's enough to say, write a new get.
Why does the sex affect the process, the getting process? Because what if I'm sex of farewell?
Final sex.
Farewell?
Farewell?
Goodbye.
Yeah, sex, yeah.
So,
Well, I don't understand really the contradiction between having sex and being a process of get.
so the goodbye is supposed to come before the get's written, right? Why? Well, because what does the get mean? What is the intention of a get?
Freeze both of them.
Well, but it's a freeze both of them, which means that it is the husband's intention when the get is written that the relationship will be ended, right? Sex is the opposite of believing the relationship will be ended. Now, I know.
Relationship become to be a different relationship.
Not according to Jewish law, right? According to Jewish law, and this is going to be seen even more in the next section of this Mishnah, according to Jewish law, sex is an act of betrothal, right? You may think that you're just playing around and having fun and have no intention of getting married. According to the rabbis, you break it, you bought it, right? You have sex. We would never assume that you were just sleeping around like some sort of horrible scoundrel. Clearly, you must have been thinking of having a relationship with this woman. So therefore, because we would never insult you, we know that you were trying to get married with sex. And therefore, your get is done.
But the consuming of the get is when the other one receives the paper. Because I can write it, but until I don't give the paper to the other person, we are still married. So I can have sex because still we are married. And when I give to the other person the following day, whenever,
Right.
they get only them become to be delivered. They become consuming actively.
So as much as Judaism is often attacked for being too legalistic and cold and dispassionate and all of that, the get is built on the emotional state of the husband. If you undermine that emotional state, then the get is trash. The get no longer represents what he's feeling. And Judaism is saying very hard and strong, if you have sex, that is not the act of somebody who is saying goodbye. Now, I know that there are people out there who do that, and who have, as you said, farewell sex, one more time, goodbye, whatever, that is not Judaism's understanding. Right? And in fact, Judaism goes in other parts of the Mishnah and the Talmud even more, talks about the fact of when husbands and wives should not be together. And one of the things they also say is, even if you have made up your mind to divorce her, but you still haven't even written the get, you still shouldn't. Now, it doesn't have a legal implication, but morally, if you're planning on divorcing, don't have sex anymore.
So how long is the maximum time between framework between the writing and the delivery?
How long does it take?
Yeah,
It depends.
Like, for example,
It depends.
could be a year.
It could be a lot of time. It could be a little time. But
It
obviously,
could be also 5 years.
but we're going to find out in just a couple Mishnayot that if you swear not to have sex with your wife, that's grounds for divorce. Right? You're not allowed to say, I'm not going to sleep with you anymore. And as soon as you do sleep with her, then the get's gone, and now you have to have a new one written. So there is kind of a maximum time between the writing and the delivering based on how long you can go without being together. And if you are together, it cancels out the get anyway, so now you need a new one. Right? So I should point out, because this is because we do marriage now in one way, right? When you want to get married nowadays, you have the man offer, again, this is the Jewish wedding ceremony, not what happens, on YouTube with proposal videos. I'm talking about the actual Jewish wedding parts, right? The man offers the ring, right? The woman accepts the ring. If that happens, they are now engaged. I know we call it married, but that's because you're engaged in a super engagement. And that engagement is finalized with actual marriage when we do the Sheva Brachot, when we do the 7 blessings at the end of our ceremony. Those used to be 2 separate events in the ancient world. The man would propose, she would accept, and then he would prepare the home. And then a year later, they would have the party with the 7 blessings, and they would be finally super married, done, all married. The idea of marrying with a ring as the only way of marrying, that is something the rabbis discuss, because there are 2 other ways you can get married. Now, do not follow these. The rabbis are very clear that these 2 other ways are not the ways that we should. One of them is with a shtar, with a document, which you actually say, with this document, rather than with this ring, you are consecrated to me according to the laws of Moses in Israel. That will technically do, right?
Also with 2 witnesses.
Same other rules with witnesses. So will bia. So will sex, right? If you say, with this sex, you are married to me, and the woman is agreeable, right? This is not like license for rape. That is another way to get married. So you can get married using a piece of paper. You can get married with a gift that's worth at least a pruta, or you can get married by having sex together as a marriage act, by what even in European law was often called consummating the marriage. The rabbi said, doing that, using sex as your wedding, right? No, don't do that, right? That is licentious.
Because you don't have witnesses. It's my word against her word.
So there are a whole bunch of issues about this. Yes.
No, but legally, that's the main problem.
That doesn't mean you didn't have witnesses.
Yeah. She can say, oh yeah, we had sex because you promised me we will marry. And I can say, no, I never say that.
It's almost as though Judaism consistently tries to tell men, don't have sex with someone you're not planning to marry. Or more specifically, that you're not already married to. Right? The rabbis knew that it wasn't illegal to have sex with somebody, as long as they're not married to someone else, that you're not marrying. But the rabbis also thought that that was a terrible, terrible thing for society, for guys to just go around having sex with a bunch of different women. And so the rabbis tried to rein that in by saying, no, because we respect you so much, we know that when you had sex, you didn't mean it to just be fun. Of course you meant it to be marriage. So congratulations, we now hear you're married. And if you want to get rid of her, you're going to have to make a divorce, and you'll have to pay a ketubah. You'll have to pay her the money that is deserved for every bride. So the rabbis really tried to prevent that from happening as a regular occurrence. And because that is the halakha, the actual Torah halakha of one of the ways you can get married, we understand even more clearly why, after you've written the get, if you have sex, you're marrying her again, right? You're basically marrying her one more time.
In the old days, was virginity counted as an issue? Is like virginity?
Right, virginity was usually considered desirable because it ensured that there were no questions of whose kids these were. Because if she was a virgin, it was almost impossible for her to be pregnant from another man. So that was considered desirable in the ancient world. But women who were widows or divorcees and all of that, that was also they got married, and that was fine. It wasn't a bad thing to no longer be a virgin. In general, however, people preferred that you be a virgin before the first time you were married. And I should point out again, both men and women were hoped to be virgins before they got married. It wasn't just about women, except for women, it was easier to tell than with a man.
Thank you.
On the thing about you married her if you had intercourse,
Mm-hmm.
if that doesn't apply if she wasn't Jewish, right?
No, because Jewish marriage laws have no standing. They have no jurisdiction over non-Jews. That's one reason why in the conservative movement and in many others like the Orthodox, we don't do intermarriages. It's not because we don't think that they're really in love or anything like that. It's simply my jurisdiction as a rabbi and the jurisdiction of Jewish law ends at the edge of the Jewish people.
Right.
And so making a contract, a relationship between a person who is Jewish and a person who isn't Jewish is like saying American law should apply in Mexico. It's no. If you have somebody standing on one side of the border, someone standing on the other side of the border, the law can't extend to the person on the other side of the border. They have to come into our side of the border, and then our law applies.
One more thing. Was the reason for this is because if you don't know and you did the marriage and later found out something happened, it would be really bad. Like moms are bad.
Mamzer, well, so we're going to get into the question of mamzerim a little bit later, maybe tonight, and that is a big issue. But yeah, the rabbis wanted to make sure that both with divorce as well as with marriage, that everything was done precisely and cleanly. Because if you got it wrong, as you pointed out, you're now creating adulterous situations. Because if, for example, you followed Beit Shammai's opinion and said that the get was fine, even if they were secluded. Again, remember, he wasn't saying that sex was okay. He was saying that secluded was okay. And then later on, we find out that they did have sex. Maybe two witnesses show up and say, oh, yeah, did you see them going at it? Right. And now we know, oh, my God, they did. But it's 5 years down the line and she had remarried and now she's had kids from the other guy. But it turns out that she wasn't really divorced. Now she is committing adultery. The guy she married is committing adultery. And the children that came from them are mamzerim, which legally puts them in a very difficult position for the rest of their life. That is not the kind of stuff you want to have happen. That's why it's always best to write the get and deliver the get. And as a matter of fact, in most communities to this day, we try to remove the husband and the wife's participation as much as possible so that nothing can mess it up. So that when the get has been written and the get has been delivered, we try to make sure that it is as streamlined as possible to prevent any issues from arising.
Sorry, last thing. But if you follow the rule of Hillel, and there's a seclusion, but you don't do the second get, you would all that bad stuff you said would happen.
Yeah, as far as Hillel is concerned, if you seclude yourself, but you still use the original get that you had written before the seclusion, then you're not divorced.
Yeah,
right. You're still married.
I think Hillel went to great extents to make sure the kids were not moms.
Which we're going to come back to maybe tonight. We'll see how No, it's a very important digression because we're going to cover how serious these issues are when we get to a later Mishnah.
So let's say that you had like a somewhat an arranged marriage, you had like a ceremony where you didn't consummate. You're not married, right?
No, you're married.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, you're married. So let's say, for example, we'll use the modern example because they used to be two separate events, but use the modern version of a Jewish wedding. The husband offers the ring, and he says, hooray, he does the wedding formula. The bride takes it. And then the husband says, on second thought, boom, and runs away, right? And he decides he doesn't want to do the rest of the ceremony. They never say the Sheva Brachot, that he is gone after the giving of the ring and the blessing of Erosin. Sorry, you still have to get a get. right? If you've done even that first part of the ceremony, you are now married as far as having the responsibilities of marriage, which means you have to do the get and everything else that goes with it. You just don't get the privileges of marriage, meaning you don't get to have the hanky-panky. So that Judaism says as soon as you make the betrothal, as far as Judaism is concerned, you need a get if you do not want to go through with the rest of the marriage. And it doesn't matter whether you've had sex yet or not. Once you've made that betrothal, you are bound together, and you would then need a get to unbind you from each other.
So, Rabbi, after if the guy delivered the get,
Right?
after that, they cannot.
Welcome to the second half of the Mishnah. Right? So what Yoel is asking about is what happens. I shouldn't have erased seclusion. What happens if the seclusion happens after the delivery?
They gotta get married again.
We're going to talk about it.
And before that, so if you deliver a ring,
Right.
okay,
You offer the ring, she accepts the ring.
yes,
Right.
and you have a heart attack, the other person's a widow.
Yes. I mean, kind of. We're going to actually deal with that.
Because
Looking at the clock, probably not tonight,
Because
but
they didn't consume the marriage.
they didn't consummate, right?
Yeah, that's why.
Kind of, right? So this is we're going to get into a couple really, really complicated issues of levirate marriage in just a little bit, and that's going to come up. So why don't you hold that question until we get there? Let's finish this Mishnah, however, where we have the seclusion now happening after the get was delivered. So we're on part 3 by our reading.
If they have married their brother-in-law,
I think you skipped. One who divorces.
Whoops, sorry.
It's okay.
One who divorces his wife and she afterwards spends a night with him at the same inn.
Right, which means they're secluded. Now, again, we don't know that necessarily something happened. It's not like they were in the middle of the living room floor with everyone watching, but they were together in a place where couples together would likely do things, right? It's not like they met each other in the marketplace. Okay, so the seclusion is happening after the divorce. Keep going.
Beit Shammai says she does not require a second bill of divorce from him.
Right, so again, Beit Shammai is using the same rule, which is to say, we can trust them. That just because they were together doesn't mean anything happened. Yes, we would probably prefer that they didn't do that, but if they do, we don't say that they did. Right? We don't believe that they actually had intercourse, because if they did, now they're married again. Right? They get remarried in that act. Keep going.
And Beit Hillel says she requires a second bill of divorce from him.
Right? That Beit Hillel says after the seclusion, write a new get, deliver a new get.
They don't have any tuba, any amount of money that you need to.
So the ketubah document that we use now is in order to specify according to the wishes of the couple. If there is no official ketubah document, the rabbis still absolutely enforce whatever a standard ketubah would be for people in their situation. So there was like what's the term? Accepted practice. So if the accepted practice was 100 and you didn't write a ketubah, if you needed to get divorced, she was getting 100. Right now, sometimes the couples would arrange a ketubah that was enormous, 5,000, 10,000 or something, as kind of a barrier to keep him from ever divorcing her for no good reason. But the standard practice would be the accepted if there wasn't a document to prove that another arrangement had been made.
So let's take the worst situation, okay? Let's say husband Khalida, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm a lady.
Right?
I divorced.
That is scary, yes.
Yeah, I divorced him, okay? No, him, okay? Long years of expectation, okay? You need to say first.
So Lady A is divorcing Mr. B.
Lady A ran short of money.
Mhm.
And she said, wow, I need money. For any reason, also
Right.
medical for any reason.
Yeah.
I said, maybe I will try to seduce my former husband. I will have sex.
Right.
I will have a second get, so he need to pay me the extra money.
Yeah.
So that's a nice way to work.
But you know
they
what?
have the
But there
relationship,
is
so that she
but there
knows
is
how to do it.
a perfect way to prevent her from doing that. Don't have sex with her.
They are humans.
Just don't have sex with your ex-wife. I mean,
They are humans. But the wife can use it in her advantage.
yeah.
Theoretically.
And the man could try to seduce her to bring her back in, right? And say, hey, you slept with me last night. Now we're married again. You have to do what I say. You have to follow my rules. You're with my family now. Because remember, in the ancient world, it was the man who had the power of divorce, not the woman. The woman could only petition the court to divorce under special circumstances. He could initiate for his own reasons. She could only initiate if there were grievous problems and other issues. So for her to do that, she doesn't get to turn around and say tomorrow, I want a divorce, or she can say that. But that doesn't mean he's going to give it to her. He's going to say, no, we're married again. Guess what, honey? We're living together till death do us part. So that plan backfires on her really, really fast. Now, again, the rabbis were not interested in coming up with laws that would prevent scoundrels from behaving badly. They were trying to come up with laws that were the appropriate interpretation of the Torah and the society that it was being used in a way that would regulate behavior to the best of our human ability. And some people are still going to do wrong things. Some people are still going to steal. Some people are still going to murder. Some people are still going to sleep with people they shouldn't be sleeping with. And then the law kicks in and tries to deal with the consequence.
Back to what he said. When he said he has to pay ketubah twice.
Well, for the second marriage.
Right, for the second marriage. Wouldn't, if you hadn't paid the ketubah yet, wouldn't it cancel it out? Because doesn't her property become his property? So he would no longer owe his wife. You can't owe your wife ketubah, right?
Well, you can. I mean, you have a lien against your property until the ketubah is paid.
Yeah, but once you marry, doesn't that extinguish the lien? Sorry.
So if he delivered the get, but he hasn't delivered the cash because he's liquidating his assets to be able to pay off the ketubah, and before he delivers the cash, if they have sex again, and now she is married again, does that cancel out the debt from the first ketubah? Probably. I can't. It's not an eventuality that I've wrestled with myself, but probably yes, because the debt that he would be paying to her would be to him. Now, if they made stipulations before they got married the second time that her property remained hers, then no, it wouldn't. But that has to be a stipulation before they get married, not after. Because there were ways for women to keep their own property when they got married, but it had to be a condition of the marriage. It couldn't just be, I want to. There had to be an agreement, like a prenuptial in the modern terms.
Kept your own property, that would be property you obtained before the marriage, right? Not during the marriage.
Or the property that you were owed, right?
You weren't owed that till after the marriage.
No, you said that it was after the divorce. As soon as the divorce happens, you are owed the money.
Right. Yeah. I thought they just got to keep the property that they had and were owed before the marriage.
No, they can have any agreement that they both agree to. All right. But let's go ahead and talk about the second bill of divorce, more specifically, part I of that same page.
When does she require a second bill of divorcement? 1, when she was divorced after marriage. But if she was divorced after betrothal, she does not require from him a second bill of divorcement since he is not yet familiar with her. Okay, so speaking of consummating, I'm going to have to change my timeline here again just to make it clear. These are categories that aren't so obvious to our modern world. Right, so you have the betrothal, right, which in the modern world we recognize as the ring ceremony. And then we have the 7 blessings, right, the Sheva Brachot, which in the modern ceremony, this is all of 20 minutes. But in the ancient world, this could be a year. So if he gives her the ring and then he divorces her, and then he is secluded, does he need to give her a second get? And what the answer here is saying is no. That if they never reached the Sheva Brachot, they never reached the consummation of the marriage, then they're not familiar with each other. It's not normal for them to be intimate, right? Husband and wife, they get used to each other and they respond to each other, and it's normal for them to be intimate. And so if they're secluded, we kind of expect that that's a likely outcome because they've been together many, many times. If they've never actually been together before the divorce happened,
then when they get secluded, it's like still two strangers who are being secluded. And so we don't expect that they immediately jump into bed. Make sense? Okay. All right, we are now on 4:8.
Ready?
I am. Now it gets complicated.
Permits the rival wives of a deceased brother to be married to the surviving brothers.
Okay. Let's get a better pen. Are you ready? You may want to follow along on the commentary at the bottom of the page on this one. We've got two brothers, brother one, brother two. All right, let's call him Reuben, and let's call him Samuel, Shmuel. So they're brothers, and Reuben is married to, let's call her Leah. All right, Leah is a great name. And Leah has a sister, as we all know. Let's call her Rachel. So, and then we have third wife, let's call her, no, we already used an S. Give me another name that doesn't begin with an R and L. What? Tamar, right? So Reuben is married to Leah. Shimon is married to Rachel. Rachel and Leah are sisters, right? We got that group dynamic here.
Not Reuben and Shimon.
No, Reuben and Shimon are brothers, and Leah and Rachel are brothers. Two brothers married two sisters. Okay, so we got the idea here. Now, in a normal situation, if Reuben dies and he doesn't have any children, then Shimon has to perform yibum, the levirate marriage of the two surviving women, in order to give him a child that will be considered Reuben's child.
Both, or can choose one?
We'll go into more detail later. Here it's going to be a different issue, right?
Because it's very, very costly.
So maybe we'll study Yibum later, and we'll go into all the variations of it. But that would be the normal procedure if Reuben died. So here Reuben does die. Okay, Reuben dies. What's the problem? The problem is Leah and Rachel are sisters, and the Torah says that you're not allowed to marry sisters. So how can Shimon marry Leah? Okay, that's a big question. Everyone agrees he can't marry Leah because that's his sister. So he has to do, maybe, we're going to come back to this in a second, maybe he has to do what's known as chalitza. Chalitza is the act where he says, I'm not going to marry her, and there's a ceremony with a shoe and some spitting, where basically she says, how dare you not build up your brother's house, but it also means that she is free and he no longer has an obligation. We got that image? So he can't marry Leah, but what about Tamar? Can she get married? Or once Leah is out of the running, does it wipe all of the women of Reuben's household out of the running?
Tamar is not a sister.
Tamar is not a sister. Tamar is just another wife, right? She's just another lady. So that is the issue we're dealing with here. Everyone got that?
For me, it's very clear.
Yes?
For me, yes, he allowed to marry Tamar.
Okay, so you're on Beit Shammai's side. But keep reading. Let's go to Beit Shammai permits, right? Yep.
Rival wives. Let's read that again.
Yeah, go ahead and read that again now that we've got the family tree up.
Shammai permits the rival wives of the deceased brother to be married to the surviving brothers, but Beth Hillel forbids them.
All right, so Beit Hillel says no. Once a wife of Reuben is nullified, is ineligible, that's the right word, ineligible, then all of them are ineligible, right? It comes as a group. Either Shimon has an obligation to the wives of Reuben, or he doesn't. He can't have an obligation to some and not others.
But he has an obligation. The problem is that Torah forbidden the sister. So the problem is not the obligation that prevents him. The problem is that he cannot marry Leah because he's a sister. However, Tamar is not a sister. So yes, he can do it.
Okay, so let's look at it between the two lenses. So we've got, I need one more color. Shammai is looking at the obligation to each woman and to the deceased brother as a separate obligation, right? I am obligated to my brother and to each of his wives. Whereas Hillel, in green, right? Is that green? Yes. And again, this is bait and bait. Hillel says, no, the obligation is to my brother to build him up through his wives. If one of them is ineligible, it spoils the whole group. And therefore, I can't do the process of yibum, of levirate marriage. So they disagree. Now, again, we're going to see that that's normal that they disagree, as we've probably seen for a while. But the issue here is Hillel says that it's forbidden. Shammai says no problem. Again, with Tamar only, not with Leah. Good? Good. Okay, keep going, because it's going to get another little layer, which will depend on what we just decided.
If they have performed Halisa, Beth Shammai say pronounces them unfit to marry into the priesthood, but Beth Hillel pronounces them fit.
Okay, so if instead of getting married, they do chalitza, which is where Shimon says, I'm not going to marry you, and they do the ceremony, then according to Beit Shammai, then they cannot get married to Mr. Cohen. Right?
I thought it was any priest.
Well, Cohen meaning priest, yeah. I mean that the Kohanim as not his family name, but his title, right? It's just calling him Mr. Cohen because it's cute and funny.
But to do that, you have to write a get.
No, they just do chalitza, right? So why not? Because the Kohen is not allowed to marry a divorcee, right? A Kohen can't marry someone who's divorced.
Chalitza is a divorce.
And chalitza is like a divorce because they were, as soon as Reuben died, according to Shimon, or in a regular yibum situation, as soon as Reuben died, Shimon was kind of betrothed. He was sort of married to the woman. And therefore, if they do chalitza, which cancels that, it's kind of like a divorce. And that means that the Kohen can't marry them. Whereas for Hillel, because the two women were never eligible, doesn't matter whether they did chalitza or not, because he couldn't have married them. Therefore, they are not considered to be divorced, and they can still get married to a Kohen. Remember, widows can marry the Kohanim, no problem. It's only a question of whether they're divorced or not divorced. Everybody follow that?
So Hillel allowed them to marry Mr. Cohen.
Yep, exactly. So the different layers that are happening here, you might think, oh, he's strict or he's lenient, but in the other level, it has the opposite effect, right? Shammai is lenient in that he will let Tamar get married, but then that means that if they do chalitza, they can't get married to the Kohen. And Hillel is strict in one sense of not letting that happen, but that means he's lenient in the sense that he will let them get married to Mr. Cohen if they do chalitza. So once again, as we've talked about for a number of weeks, there's no one way to be strict or one way to always be lenient. Being strict in one way will almost always create leniencies in a different area and vice versa. And this lays it out very, very cleanly.
How could chalitza be considered a divorce if they never got married?
Because remember how we talked about the ring as the betrothal?
Yeah.
Right? Your brother dying is like giving her a ring. Because as soon as he dies, you have an obligation to be married to them. Right? You're betrothed to them. It's automatic by their death. Which is why, for example, if Leah and Tamar, or let's just do Tamar, right? Let's have only one woman to worry about at the moment. In a normal situation, Reuben dies. Tamar is the only person around. If she decides to go get married to Mr. Let's find somebody that doesn't have a name, to Mr. Judah, right? Just some other guy, that would be considered adultery, right? As soon as he dies, she is semi-married to Shimon. And that's why you have to do either chalitza or yibum. You either send her away or you take her on and you have a child and it's considered Reuben's child. But she can't just walk off and go get married to Mr. Judah without doing the other act first. So yeah, it's like she's married.
So if he were to actually marry her, then quickly give her a get right after the marriage ceremony, that would be basically the same thing as doing chalitza?
Well, no. I mean, it wouldn't have all the same legal implications as chalitza. but it would definitely make her a divorcee and really be very kind of rude. If you're not going to take her in and have a child and raise the child of your brother, then you shouldn't marry her, making her think that you're going to, and then divorce her the next day.
I just meant like if you didn't want to get spit on.
Then you should actually build up your brother's house. But we don't do this anyway, and chalitza nowadays is much more humane because we don't usually allow yibum to even happen, and so we always do chalitza in circumstances like this, and it's done in a way that is not humiliating or degrading to the brother, because it's not really his choice in the modern world. We don't let them go through with yibum even if they wanted to.
If they call him, he do the halisa,
Right?
they call him like the house or something, the shoe.
You're right. Yeah, but I mean,
Call him like,
right.
like
But the rabbis generally didn't want yibum to happen. They knew that it could, and they had certain circumstances that they were okay with it, but generally they discouraged it. And like I said, now 2,000 years later, it would have to be the most exceptional of circumstances for any rabbi of any movement to agree to have yibum happen. I understand it was still common in some Sephardic communities and some Mizrahi communities, but really for most of the last 50, 60, maybe even 100 years, yibum has not been a common practice in any community that I'm aware of. Okay, with that in mind, we're going to get one more version, part 3.
Read it number 3 or we're like in A, 3A, but that Hillel pronounces them unfit, that part? Because we read up to the unfit married to priesthood, but that Hillel pronounces them unfit, and although this pronounced unfit and this pronounced fit, Beshmei say did not refrain from marrying women.
No, we're on part 3 still, because we did one.
Oh, okay.
One was our first case, right? 2 was if they did chalitza. Now we're on part 3.
Okay, so if they have married their brother-in-law, Beshmei pronounces them fit to marry into the priesthood, but the Hillel pronounces them unfit.
All right, ready to be an unlucky woman? So imagine the situation where she goes ahead and she marries Shimon, right? And this might be following Beit Shammai's Tamar. Well, any of them, yeah, right? Because Leah was never supposed to get married at all. So this is Tamar. Right? So Tamar gets married into Shimon, and then Shimon dies. So she's now a widow twice. Right? It's like the original Tamar. No, like the original Tamar from Judah and Tamar. Right? You know, she was married to 2 of the boys, and both of them died. But now she's a widow, and you know what? She's done with the family. There are no more sons to get married to. So she decides she wants to go off and marry Mr. Kohen. So the question is, can she? According to Beit Shammai, yes, she can, because she's just a widow twice, and widows are fine to marry into the priesthood. According to Beit Hillel, absolutely not, because she shouldn't have gotten married in the first place. That was a forbidden relationship, and any woman who's had a forbidden relationship can't get married to a Kohen, even if that forbidden relationship is now done.
And what if it was unintentional, that the rabbi did a mistake?
Any woman who had a forbidden relationship, if the rabbi accidentally marries you to your sister, that doesn't mean that it's not a problem.
No, maybe a rabbi didn't read this Mishnah and say, oh yeah, from Shammai, that's okay.
Yeah.
So it's not conformed.
Okay, so
It's not intentional.
So we're going to get to that in just a second, but let me first give a little bit of practical rabbinics. If a rabbi doesn't know who's allowed to marry who, he shouldn't be doing weddings. That's just a very important statement. However, if, and this is the issue we're going to get to in just the next section, if the rabbi believes Beit Shammai is right and it's allowed, and then Mr. Cohen wants to get married by Beit Hillel, that's where the issue becomes more complicated, right? What happens if after it happened, it wasn't an accident, it was on purpose, and they believe the halakha was right, but now they are going to deal with the halakha of someone else? Or let's imagine this happens, and then there are children born. Well, if it's a forbidden relationship, then they're a mamzer. Beit Shammai thinks their kids are fine. Beit Hillel thinks their kids are mamzerim, that they are illegitimate children. What happens when that kid wants to get married to someone from Beit Hillel's family? That's the next section, right? But we can see how that would be a problem. right? If one side says the relationship is okay and the other school says the relationship isn't, what happens to the kids of those schools who then want to get married? Because they're still Jewish, right? And they still live in the same communities, even if they have rivalry. So whose law do we follow? Read.
And although these pronounced unfit and these pronounced fit, Beth Shammai did not refrain from marrying women from the daughters of Beth Hillel, nor did Beth Hillel refrain from marrying women from the daughters of Beth Shammai.
Okay, so what's the answer?
They didn't answer it.
No, they did.
They did.
Which is, yes, I think that you should not have let Tamar marry Shimon. And therefore, I think that the kids that came from Tamar and Shimon are illegitimate, but they can still marry my kids. It is the most radical statement of pluralism that you're going to find in any of the texts, because each side believes the other side has said something that was totally wrong, right? Not just a little wrong of, was that cow really kosher or not kosher, but this is an illegitimate relationship. You might as well be just committing adultery in the middle of the town square and then, stamping the kid as being born from adultery, and then you expect me to let them marry my daughter? And the answer is yes.
So they are not mamzerim.
They are and they aren't. According to Beit Hillel, they would be. But Beit Hillel would still let their children marry them, so legally they're not in the eyes of Beit Hillel, even though legally in the eyes of Beit Hillel they are. Right? They recognize that this other way of handling
In theory, they are mamzerim. In practice, they are not.
In theory, they are mamzerim. In practice, they are Jews. Right. Well, but it's more powerful than that. It's not just we're going to look the other way. It's they recognize that although they disagree with Beit Shammai, that Beit Shammai is taking a legitimate, principled understanding of the halakha. And the results of that, they absolutely disagree with. But that doesn't mean they're willing to drive them out of Judaism just because they disagree with that, even on something as huge as an issue as who do you get to marry and have kids with, which is one of the biggest issues you can possibly have in Jewish law. And therefore, yeah, they absolutely disagree. And it seems all like theoretical. And until you actually have to look at the two kids that come and say they want to get married, and each side goes, well, wait a minute. If that guy was married to her and she would, that would be illegitimate. Yeah, but they're from Beit Hillel, so they allow it. Okay, if they allow it, and that's why it happened, then I will allow that person to marry into my family, and vice versa. They may they think that what I did was illegitimate, but they'll accept my kid to marry into their family. It is just a huge statement of saying my way is my way, and I am not giving up my position, but I'm also not going to drive our people apart just because you have a different position.
So the discussion is inconsequent because
of course not. Within Beit Hillel,
no, but
it matters completely.
yeah,
Within Beit Shammai, it matters completely.
The consequences are null because the consequence. Why so important the decision about mamzerim and everything? But if at the end doesn't matter, okay.
So
we accept anyone as a good Jew. So why the discussion? So who cares?
So
if there's no consequence of the act.
95% of the halakha about marriages they agreed on, right? So if a man and a woman said, well, I know she's married to him and I know I'm married to her, but we're going to go have a kid and that should be fine. Both Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai go, no.
About that situation.
Right. But within their community, the consequences were inviolate. They were 100% true and 100% unchanging. Right? So if Beit Shammai had a whole village, then everybody in that village would be ruled by their rulings, and who could marry who and who could marry the Kohen or not marry the Kohen, and all of that would follow exactly their rulings. Done. It's not inconsequential. It would dominate the community. And in Beit Hillel town, it would be the same thing. That what happens in their town would be 100% the law, and it would follow exactly Beit Hillel's rulings. The only place where it looks fuzzy is what happens when a boy from Beit Hillel falls in love with with a girl from Beit Shammai. Do we say, because of your rules, I won't let my kids marry you because maybe there's a problem, right? Maybe there is some contamination because you had a different halakha than I did. Or do I say, you were handling things your way, we're handling things our way, and I know we disagree with that, but at the end, I know that you're still following Torah. It may not be precisely my Torah. Now, this whole issue is spelled out in black and white or red and green on this board, but this is what happens every single day throughout most of Jewish history when a Jewish person who lived in Spain moves to Morocco, or a person from Morocco moves to Poland, or a person from Poland moves to Egypt. How do the people in Egypt know that this person is Jewish? How do they know they're not a mamzer? How do they know that they're in good standing or that they don't have any other issues? They don't, but they accept.
They don't need a letter from the rabbi, from the community.
No. The idea that a person would show up with proof of Jewishness is a totally modern invention, and one that has been designed to divide us in order to protect certain communities' interests rather than actually unifying the Jewish people.
So they trusted the word of the person.
Yes. Now,
They
if the
had
person did
someone say,
something,
"I'm a
if the
Jew."
person did something weird, right? If the person showed up and said, "I'm a Jew, but I'm not circumcised," explain that, please. If the person shows up and says, "I'm a Jew, and here's my lunch, the roast ham," I need to understand that. Or they say, "I'm a Jew and I worship Zeus," then there could be questions. So if a person had issues with what they're doing, if they gave evidence of why we might suspect them, then yes, there could be an investigation to ensure the person was Jewish. But generally speaking, no, there was no investigation. How could there be? I can't pick up the phone and call the rabbi in Spain 1,000 years ago.
Send a letter.
And in the meantime, what does this person do? Sit in a box? Right? He's not allowed to work. He's not allowed to connect with our community. Do we give him an aliyah?
3 months or a year later.
Right.
You just going.
Right. I mean, how do we handle that? Right? If there was, like I said, there was a reason to be suspicious, then yes, they knew how to be suspicious, and there are chuvot about those kinds of things. But generally speaking, a person shows up who seems to know what they're doing, who seems to understand what Judaism is. We don't have a way, and we don't have an interest in inquiring into, I need to see the ketubot from your great grandparents. That kind of craziness is totally modern.
Is there anything like, is there like a rationale, like they acknowledge the jurisdiction of each other on this authority, or is there like a color of law argument? You know what color of law is?
No, but
basically you have a court order to do something, so even if it's incorrect, it was in good faith under the color of law.
Okay, well, that kind of issue does come up of the authority of judges, even when judges are making mistakes. That does happen in other places. That's not exactly what's being sort of described here. It's more like what we would call in the modern legal terms full faith and credit. Right.
Jurisdiction almost.
Exactly. If someone got married in Tennessee, we assume Tennessee knows how to do weddings. And so when they show up in Florida and they said, with a certificate that says we got married in Tennessee, we don't say, well, I don't know how they do things in Tennessee, but here you have to do it like this, or let me inspect how Tennessee did it. No, we say Tennessee is Tennessee, and I'm sure they're good. So yeah, if you got married there, that's good enough for us. And that's how not only does between states, but that happens for marriages between even different countries. If you got married, where did you get married? Because I know you got married outside the States.
Ecuador.
If you got married in Ecuador, right, the U.S. doesn't ask you to redo your marriage when you get here, because we're not sure whether Ecuador was doing it right. We say, no, Ecuador accepts our weddings. We accept Ecuador's weddings. It's reciprocal.
Actually, it was in Uruguay. The chuppah was in Ecuador, and the civil was in Uruguay.
Right. For the United States, they would care more about Uruguay than Ecuador. But for Judaism, of course, Ecuador is just fine.
There was would that be something? What about I know we're running out of time, but the gay marriages before the recent Supreme Court case a couple of years ago.
Whole different topic. But I want to finish off part 5. Yeah.
And in the case of all matters of purity and impurity, in respect to which this pronounced pure and this pronounced impure, they do not refrain from preparing foods requiring a condition of purity, each by means of the vessel of each other.
Okay, so all that talk we've had about, what is tameh and tahor, what is pure, impure, which by the way extends to other food issues, they would still follow. If someone produced the food and they showed up and said, hey, have some challah, they didn't say, oh, are you following my rules of purity when you baked this? They just would accept that it was following a rule of purity when the person baked it. It may not be my rule, but I know you followed the rule that dominated your community. And that was acceptable. That was good enough, which is, again, to bring it to the modern issues over sometimes, like, for example, kashrut supervision, where one group will demand that another group will adhere to their understanding of halakha. That's not the way halakha has worked in the past.
What about if you had no religion whatsoever before?
If you have no religion whatsoever before, then you adopt the religion of whoever is bringing you into Judaism. You adopt the rulings of whoever is bringing you into Judaism.
Okay.
That was what happened in the classical world, and that still is what happens in the modern world. So you follow whoever your teacher is when becoming Jewish. But for someone to say, to visit a restaurant that is under the supervision of Rabbi Q, and say, yes, but Rabbi Q, I know he came from the yeshiva, blah, 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 and that yeshiva and my yeshiva, we have a difference of opinion on kashrut topic, 25. So therefore, I won't eat in that restaurant unless it's also supervised by Rabbi P. No, that's not the way it works.
Okay.
Now, if they're serving ham sandwiches, by all means, don't eat there. Right? That's definitely not kosher, even if they say Rabbi so-and-so approves it. If you can see obvious errors, then you can stay away from obvious errors. But if they are keeping kosher, even if it's different than your kosher, that's not an issue. That's not the issue. Again, going back to Poland, Spain, Iraq, the different communities had different rulings on kashrut and purity, and people still ate when they visited the other countries. Right? If I'm an Ashkenazic traveler and I go to Morocco, I'm not going to only eat dates. I'm going to eat the food, and I'm going to accept that what they're doing is appropriate. I may do things differently from my own. Like, for example, the Ashkenazim often had a different waiting period than the Sephardim, and vice versa, depending upon which community. And I might follow my waiting period between meat and milk as opposed to the local waiting period of meat and milk if I'm just a visitor. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to eat their meat. I will still accept their meat. Within my own community, I might have a different standard, but within their community, I'm willing to accommodate the fact that they have a different ruling.
I have a question about this. My sister-in-law, she is a former Israeli,
Right?
but she lives in the U.S. She was married and everything. But when she goes to Israel, she observes 2 days on the holidays that in Israel, only 1 day. Is this normal?
Yes, that is normal. So if somebody is going to make Israel their place of residence, if they are moving to Israel, even for one cycle of Chag by most people's ruling, although some require permanent, but even if you're only planning to be there for 3 of the festivals, right, then you follow the local custom and you only observe 1 day. If you move out, even if it's only temporary, but you're going to be out for more than a year, then you follow the local custom of the diaspora, which is 2 days. So yes, if somebody was moving to the U.S. from Israel, they don't follow Israel; they follow the U.S.
But
and vice
she's
versa.
not. She's just going to visit Israel. She's going to visit her daughter.
But she's visiting Israel, but she still lives in the U.S.
In the U.S., yeah.
Then yeah, she's considered a diaspora Jew.
To use
Yeah. Most authorities say that if you are living outside of Israel but visit Israel when it is a Chag, that you should follow your home observance. There's discussion about doing that privately rather than publicly. So, for example, when you need to do, the Shacharit and Musaf and Mincha that are the Chag rather than Chol HaMoed, or a weekday if it's like after Shavuot, that you should do that privately rather than publicly. You don't go around and expect everyone else to accommodate your extra day. But most authorities do say that you keep the extra day while you are abroad. In fact, just one little anecdote and then we'll wrap up. This happened to me very specifically. When I was 20 years old, I went to visit Israel for my first time. And I stayed with a friend of my mother's who had been one of her students who had become Haredi, who had become ultra-Orthodox. And he was living in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. And I was there for Pesach. And it was great. Wonderful man, wonderful family. Could not have had a better time. We went, of course, for first day of Pesach services in the morning. And I didn't know a whole lot about things back then. I was still learning. And we had a great time. And then second day came along, and I was acting like it was a regular Chol Hamoed day. I wasn't acting like it was Chag for me, because what do I know? I'm kind of a young, stupid American. And as we were going up the elevator, one of his friends got on and said, well, wait a minute, isn't this guy an American? And he realized yes, and so they actually asked if I would walk up the stairs rather than use the elevator. But my host walked up with me. He didn't take the elevator and leave me behind. Because in their community, they were very clear that, no, I'm only there temporarily. I was only there for like 5 weeks. So therefore, I still follow the Chag cycle of the diaspora rather than Israel. So yes, that is something I've experienced very personally. It doesn't matter whether I had been born in Israel or not. What mattered is where I get my mail. All right, we will stop there. And there's only a few more to go. Like I told you, these particular Mishnayot were complicated. So
we start, right?
we just finished 4:8. So we'll begin with 4:9 next week.